Wednesday is the 6-year anniversary of Syria's brutal civil war. What started as political protest turned into a multinational battleground. More than 300,000 people have been killed so far, including many women and children. Russia tilted the power balance in favor of the Syrian regime, and in the process, Syria, Russia and other fighting groups have been accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Peace talks and UN resolutions have come and gone, and as the war enters its 7th year, the UN says half of Syria's population needs urgent humanitarian assistance.
The Muslim Rohingya have been denied civil and political rights for decades. They are even called the world's most persecuted minority. But they have never fled Myanmar in the numbers we're seeing right now. The UN says about 370,000 Rohingya have crossed to Bangladesh in less than 3 weeks. They are escaping a violent military crackdown. The UN says Myanmar seems to be carrying out, quote, a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. And activists warn now is the time to prevent a genocide. The UN Security Council is set to discuss the crisis on Wednesday. Well, the journey out of Myanmar is very dangerous. And once they get to Bangladesh, many Rohingya are finding what activists say is a humanitarian crisis. And to make it even worse, about 60% of those fleeing are children.
Let's turn to Colombia now, where the president is trying to secure another peace agreement before his term ends in May. President Juan Manuel Santos is resuming peace talks with Colombia's last active rebel group, the National Liberation Army, or ELN. Right-wing candidates critical of the peace process made electoral progress on Sunday. It was the first legislative election in which former FARC rebels participated as a political party. They won little electoral support, but they do have 10 congressional seats guaranteed by the 2016 peace agreement.
A violent crackdown by the Spanish government is not stopping Catalonians from claiming victory in Sunday's independence referendum. Spanish National Police there smashing their way into voting centres, trying to block what Madrid calls an unconstitutional vote. Officers confiscated electoral material and closed down polling stations. Police also hit protesters with batons and fired rubber bullets at them. Hundreds were wounded, but Catalonian officials say preliminary results suggest 90% of those who voted favoured breaking away from Spain.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm John Vors, live in Los Angeles. It's just coming up to 9:29 here. Our breaking news. Mexico's president has declared a national emergency after a powerful earthquake. The rising death toll now stands at 149. Dozens of buildings just like that one were destroyed by the magnitude 7.1 quake which hit near Mexico City. Residents are joining the search for survivors, digging through piles of rubble with their bare hands, forming human chains to remove debris piece by piece. Victims have been pulled from under buildings, and while the quake brought destruction, it's also brought out solidarity among neighbours. More than 4 million homes, businesses and organisations have lost electricity. The rescue efforts, though, continue on throughout the night.
German political life is in for a historic change after Sunday's general election. The anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim party Alternative for Germany, or AfD, is projected to become the third largest party in the federal parliament. That has infuriated protesters across Germany. They chanted Nazis out and refugees are welcome. This will be the first time a far-right party moves into the Bundestag in over half a century. Meanwhile, Angela Merkel has secured her 4th term as chancellor, but she is politically weaker now. The main traditional parties took a hit, and Mrs. Merkel will likely have a hard time forming a coalition.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, earlier we brought you a press conference from the leaders of Germany's far-right party, which made major political progress at Sunday's general election. The Alternative for Germany, or the AfD, is set to become the 3rd largest party in the federal parliament. But during the conference, the leadership problem of the AfD became pretty evident.
Some awkward moments here. The party's chairwoman said the AfD should address the dissent within its own ranks and that she won't be the party's chairwoman in Parliament. She then walked out. Let's get straight to senior international correspondent Fred Plankin following this situation as well. Fred.
The presidency of South Africa's Jacob Zuma appears to be nearing the end. In a few hours, leaders from his party, the ANC, are expected to announce whether they will remove him from office. During almost 9 years as president, Mr. Zuma's career has survived many protests, a weakening economy and hundreds of corruption allegations, all of which he denies. His term ends next year, and he could once again refuse to step down. So the opposition wants a vote of no confidence and is calling for early elections.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Amaryl Walker. Following breaking news out of the U.S. state of Virginia, rage, hate, and death in the city of Charlottesville. 3 people have been arrested after violent clashes between white supremacists and the counter-protesters, the people who came out to face them. The city has authorized police to impose a curfew, but they have not done so yet, and we are waiting to see if protests start up again. Now, federal authorities have just opened a civil rights investigation after a car plowed into a crowd of people protesting the white nationalist rally. Police have taken into custody this man who they believe was the driver. 20-year-old James Alex Fields Jr. is being held on suspicion of second-degree murder. And we want to warn you, you may find this next video graphic. And one woman, a 32-year-old woman, died while she was in this crowd when this car rammed into the people there. Also, more than a dozen people have been wounded. President Trump wrote this on Twitter, quote, "Condolences to the family of the young woman killed today and best regards to all of those injured in Charlottesville, Virginia. So sad." However, Democrats and some Republicans are criticizing President Trump for not labeling the protesters for what they are, white supremacists.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world as we continue our special coverage of Britain's decision to leave the EU. I'm Max Foster.
And I'm Clarissa Ward. A lot of news this hour.
Closely following all those developments, they are the fallout of the Brexit vote, and we're seeing some sharp internal divisions, particularly in the Labour Party today, in terms of the leadership. The Labour Party's Shadow Health Secretary has resigned. Heidi Alexander said on Twitter that the Labour Party needs a new leader after the UK voted to leave the EU. Alexander said that the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, quote, does not have the capacity to shape the answers our country is demanding.
Now, this comes after Corbyn fired his shadow foreign minister. Hilary Benn was fired earlier today after he challenged Corbyn's leadership. Labour leaders have called on Corbyn to resign for not campaigning hard enough to remain in the EU.
Hello and welcome to our viewers around the world. I'm Max Foster in London with the very latest on the investigation of the terror attack here. The Prime Minister Theresa May will chair an emergency security meeting in the coming hours. Also, police say they are speaking with people detained in 2 new raids early on Monday. ISIS claiming responsibility for the rampage in central London, but the terror group is offering no evidence at all to support that claim. The attack lasted about 18 minutes, starting when this rental van drove into pedestrians on London Bridge. The 3 attackers then left the van and went on a stabbing rampage in the popular Borough Market. A local baker recorded some of the aftermath. We warn you that some of the images here are disturbing.
Take it with me. Take this. Take this, yes.
Well, you can see police officers helping the wounded there. Police fired what they're calling an unprecedented 50 rounds to kill the attackers, who appear to be wearing suicide belts. Those belts turned out to be fake.
US Senate Republicans are gearing up for a major political battle on healthcare, with coverage for millions of Americans on the line. Repealing and replacing Obamacare was a major campaign promise of President Donald Trump, and the Senate legislation, as it stands right now, may not have enough votes to move forward. Well, critics say the bill will benefit the rich and young while hurting the poor and old. It will repeal the requirement that nearly all Americans get coverage or pay a penalty. The legislation could allow insurers to cover fewer services for people with pre-existing conditions. And it will make gradual cuts to Medicaid, the broadest source of public health insurance. Well, as expected, protests have erupted and the legislation is getting criticised from both sides of the aisle.
Almost 200 countries have agreed on a major step yet again to reduce global warming. Delegates in Rwanda pledged to reduce the greenhouse gases used in refrigerators and air conditioners. We're talking about the world's fastest growing greenhouse gases. They're found in those products. They can be thousands of times more dangerous than carbon dioxide for the environment. This deal gives developing countries more time to make changes. The UN says this is the largest climate breakthrough since the Paris Climate Agreement last year.
Olympic diplomacy achieved with North Korea during the Winter Games is now being tested. South Korea announced on Sunday the North is willing to hold talks with the United States, but there's a major sticking point. The White House says any dialogue must result in North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons. And we're now learning the South Korean President Moon Jae-in is calling on the U.S. to, quote, lower the threshold to talk with North Korea. Meanwhile, demonstrators in Seoul are protesting South Korea's diplomatic efforts with Pyongyang, but that has not stopped North Korean delegates from agreeing to continue talks with the South even after the Olympics.
Plus, 75,000 Syrian refugees stranded in the middle of the desert with no food or aid, while Amnesty International says Jordan is violating its international obligations.
If you can't make a movie out of the American classic Catcher in the Rye, then make a film about the reclusive author behind it. Up next, the new biopic that J.D. Salinger would have hated.
Quick break here. A secretive U.S. military program to investigate UFOs. Was it a waste of taxpayers' money or a national security priority? It depends on who you ask. A report from Planet Earth next.
All right, so we end the show with talk of alien life. You're probably either a believer or a skeptic, much like the agents Mulder and Scully on that hit TV show, The X-Files. Now you can help the U.S. government solve real-life investigations into possible extraterrestrial sightings. The CIA has released hundreds of declassified documents on aliens. You can find the cases on the blog of the Central Intelligence Agency, and perhaps now the truth is actually out there.